So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leanna Levine-Reisner. I'm the Network Director of Plant-Powered Metro New York. We are a community-based organization committed to our collective health empowerment through whole food, plant-based nutrition. This is an evidence-based approach to nutrition that can prevent, treat, and even reverse chronic illness. So normally we like to gather people live to build community around health and nutrition. But of course, like others, we're offering this program as part of a web series during this season of COVID-19. We're really glad you've come to learn with us today and to find community despite our distancing. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box where you're from and what you're hoping to learn today, if anything. And as a reminder, continue to mute your lines. Depending on the number of people who are in the room later, we may or may not unmute for questions. Generally, I will be taking questions from the chat box though. Victoria Moran is with us. She is the incredible founder and leader of Main Street Vegan Academy. And she'll give you more of her personal introduction through today's talk, which will go into many different aspects of weight loss, weight management, self-love, self-esteem, and body image, which are so important on so many levels. Victoria, take it away.
Hi, thank you. And thanks to everybody who's here. I'm seeing your little bitty pictures and some names of people. So whether I see you very well or not, I'm so happy that you're here. So before I start, I would be interested if people could just one at a time, and not everybody, not if you don't want to share, but if people could just unmute and give me even a sentence about why you're here today, because I want to be sure that what I share has to do with what you are looking for. So can anybody talk to me?
Hi,
Hi.
Victoria. My name is Mare. I'm also part of the Plant Power Metro community.
Cool.
I'm here today because I want to learn from you on how to improve your positive body image. I have been plant-based already for 3+ years, but I still struggle with the part of positive body image and weight sometimes.
I'll answer some of these quickly as we go, and then we can go back to them later if there's still questions that you think I could address. I am a compulsive overeater. I used to be obese, and I have not practiced binge eating, nor have I been overweight since 1983, which was probably before you were born. It was a really long time ago. And yet I still identify as a person of size because that was how I spent most of my life. So this morning I was on with a lovely young woman who's part of our community. I don't see her here, and talking about a project, and she talked about having people participate, and there would be weighing and measuring of people's bodies. And I was just horrified. It's like, are you kidding? You have to do that? And then I kind of backed off, and it's like, okay, I know people expect they're going to get weighed like if they go to a doctor's office, but no tape measures. I mean, please, how could you? And I'm sitting here in this body, which has been small for a very long time, finding myself becoming outraged at the prospect that anybody would take a tape measure and measure anybody else's body. So that whole body image thing it's a huge topic in and of itself. It should probably be its own webinar. What I can say about it is that everything that we do in our lives, whether it's to empower our health, to uplift our inner nature, yoga, meditation, women's groups, all that kind of thing, it all can feed into appreciating ourselves as we are right now, looking like we are, doing what we do, and going forward. That's really not what I thought my topic was today. I'm planning to talk more about the process of weight and weight loss for people in what I consider 3 categories of people who have trouble with food and weight. But I'd love to have a conversation about body image at some point, because it's a deal. But the one thing I think that it happens is if you stick to your guns, you can have a very different opinion of what is acceptable. And what is acceptable is how we are today. That's my opinion. So thank you for that. Does somebody else have something in particular you're interested in? Okay. Nobody, or are you just having trouble finding the unmute button? Okay, well, I'll talk then. I like to talk. So I'm Victoria Moran, as our lovely leader said, and she's such a powerhouse. She did take the Main Street Vegan Academy program, and I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of all of my graduates, but oh my gosh, she gets the Eternal Energy Award to be able to do what she's done with Plant Powered Metro New York in a very short period of time and really make it a program of gravitas in New York City and beyond. So thank you, Liana. So my history is that as I open one of my books, The Love Powered Diet, I was a fat kid in a fat phobic family. And that was a tough thing to be. My dad was a diet doctor. He was actually an ENT, but he shifted quite a bit into diet pills and diet guidance because that was lucrative. And I think also he saw a need there. I don't think that the way that he dealt with it was necessarily always coming from wisdom, but he did that. And he and my mother both had been a little bit chubby in their youth, and they had overcome that. And I think it's a little bit like being raised by parents who were religious converts. You know, it's one thing to grow up in a religion, and it's another thing to have parents who just like found the light and everything is in this kind of fanatical way. So that was how it was about weight in my home. At one time, my parents owned what was called at that time a reducing salon. You've probably seen these on old ads and commercials where women would strap themselves into these machines, these belts and rollers, and they would jostle. And the idea was if you jostled long enough and with sufficient intent, great chunks of yourself would float off into the stratosphere, never to be seen or heard from again. Did not work for me. And I was a fat kid. I was bad for business. So I never felt good about my body, never felt good about myself, except what I was able to get from a lovely nanny who largely raised me and who didn't see that there was anything wrong with a child looking as if she had enough to eat. So I was very happy to have that influence, but it was a struggle. And when I finally got to the age when my parents couldn't put me on diets anymore, I started putting myself on them. One of the things that I learned in being put on diets for my entire childhood and then going on diets in my adolescence and throughout my 20s was that Benjamin Franklin left something out when he said that there are these few things that can be said to be certain: death and taxes. There's actually another one, and that is the next diet. So my dad brought me a diet in 1965. He'd gone to a medical convention in Las Vegas, and it was basically, it was the Atkins diet, except I think Dr. Atkins was probably still in high school or college or something. It wasn't his diet. It was called Stillman. And as I've done research later, I have realized that there was actually another all meat and fat kind of diet that had been devised in the 1940s. And yet every time this cycles through, it's like, Atkins, wow, that's cool, that's new. And then there was secondary Atkins, that's cool, that's kind of new. And then it was paleo, and now it's keto. You know, it's the same diet, and it's a lot like death and taxes. So what happened for me was that I did become very interested in nutrition. I remember at age 9 climbing up on my dad's desk because he had a great big book on the top shelf of his bookcase in his private office that was called Alimentaris Humanus. And I don't know how I knew that meant nutrition, but somehow I did. And I pulled down this giant leather volume and all full of dust. and tried to understand this medical school nutrition book, which I didn't have a lot of luck with, except there was one chart that was very much like the Andy score chart that Dr. Furman came up with for Whole Foods, of foods listed by nutrient density. And the first several foods I had never heard of, and I presumed that they were foreign because they were words like arugula and kale and collard greens. And it's like, what is this stuff? And then I saw mustard greens and I thought, well, that has to be a typo because everybody knows mustard is yellow. And finally it got down to spinach. And I knew that, you know, from the cans and Popeye. And it was such a shock to me that even though I knew that we were upper middle class and could have anything we wanted, certainly in terms of food, and why I was being denied these foods that were highest in nutrient density. Well, at that time, most people just weren't eating the kinds of foods that all of us eat now, thank goodness, and yet in the standard American diet, they're still not very prevalent, or if they are, they're often prepared in ways that make them a lot less nutritious and beneficial to the body. So as I grew up and got out into the world, I became really addicted to food and periodic binges, lots of diets. I identify a lot with the very, very obese people. If you watch, you know, my 600-pound life or something like that. And even though I was never that large by any stretch, but if I hadn't have done the compulsive dieting in between the binges, I would have been, because I lost the same 60 pounds over and over and over again. And then many times I didn't lose the whole thing, but I'd lose 10 or 20 or whatever. So that was my history. I got into Overeaters Anonymous in my 20s, and I got a little bit of peace there, but I didn't quite understand that I was supposed to be working on my inner, and I was still kind of using that as a diet club. I'd been in all the others. But when I was 33, my daughter was an infant, and I knew that if I was going to have the emotional stability to raise this child the way that she deserved, I had to get over this. And so I literally threw myself into that 12-step program of Overeaters Anonymous. And once I surrendered, I was already vegetarian. I had been trying to be vegan for years. I'd make it for, you know, a short period of time. But once I was just like, I can't do this. I don't care if I'm ever thin. I just need to be free. Then I was able to go vegan. Nobody used the term plant-based then. And that was the beginning for me, a day at a time. It's now been, I had my 36th anniversary of freedom from compulsive eating, which was also my 36th anniversary of being vegan, you know, pretty imperfectly vegan there at the beginning. I would still sometimes put some cream in the coffee when I was out places, but for the most part, that is the date for me. And it's pretty remarkable because generally people who lose weight believe that it's a success if it stays off for a year or so. Like when I've worked with people as a coach, they'll say, well, now I didn't do well with Jenny Craig, didn't do very well with LA Weight Loss. Now Weight Watchers worked for me. Weight Watchers worked, and then they'll go on about all the ones that didn't work and the ones that worked. And the question is, of course, well, if something worked, then why isn't it still working? So for me, a day at a time for 36 years, I will share with you what works as I talk about these three kinds of people that either we are or we know or we work with or we want to help. So it's not striations, it's not never the twain shall meet, but what I think of as the group one person or the type A person, we're going to call that person American. And this person is a victim of the standard American diet. For this person, it's all about the food, that they didn't know or didn't understand that the kind of food that we're given to eat in this country is perfect, not only for making people sick, but for making people gain weight. So we have foods that are highly processed, that are very high in sugar, fat, and salt, which in combination are addictive. And this is something very important to understand. People will often say, oh my God, it's sugar. I can't eat sugar. If I eat sugar, I just don't stop. And you say, oh, so you eat sugar cubes? Well, no. Cough drops. TikTok. No, it's not sugar. It's sugar and fat. You put it together and you make a cookie, or you make ice cream. It's that sugar fat combination that makes it, you just can't just eat one. And the same happens with salt and fat. You put these things together and they just become hyper delicious, hyper palatable, really, really too good for many, many people to stop on. And even eaten in moderate quantities, they're very high in calories, they're very low in nutrients. So you end up with the situation of somebody staring at the refrigerator looking for what's missing. Now, you can stand and look at a refrigerator to look at what's missing in your life. We're going to get to that. But just in terms of our type 1 person, our A person, our American person, who has been eating the standard foods that are available here for most people, they're not getting nutrients. So there is a deep physiological hunger. And the idea, if I just keep eating some more, maybe it will help. But it doesn't help, because if it's the same food, then we're not getting what we need. There are also habits in this country that are very interesting. It's changing a little bit now because of this interest in the periodic fasting. But for many, many years, from the early 1970s and even through now in a lot of circles, there was this idea of grazing and eating all day. And this, in a laboratory setting, makes sense, because the idea was you never want your blood sugar to dip. And so if you're eating all day long, then your blood sugar never does anything. And yet, historically, if you look at the history of humanity, people have always done feasting and fasting. That's just the way it has been forever. And if you look all around the world for all the different ways that people live, people pretty much eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner in virtually every culture. But here we had this thing of grazing all the time. So that feeds into the type 1 person and their difficulty with food or weight. Then we have the type B person, and that person is the emotional eater. And I think of her as usually a woman. Very often men are in this A group because they haven't really looked a lot into nutrition. It's traditionally not something, even food, cooking, and nutrition, it's not something that traditionally men have been as interested in as women. But for the type B person, she is very likely someone who has studied up on nutrition quite a bit. At least the internet version of nutrition, and probably knows a lot about what standard nutrition says, probably tries to do the very best she can. This is the person who's bringing yogurt and a piece of fruit to work for lunch. If you go out, she'll get a salad with some chicken. But if there's an upset in her life, then she's going for the Haagen-Dazs or whatever it happens to be. So this person too needs whole food plant-based nutrition, because there is some knowledge and a lot of conjecture that whole food plant-based nutrition is also very calming mentally. that just knowing that you have enough, knowing that you can eat enough. This is another thing that's really helpful. It's very frightening to think that you won't have enough to eat. So that's one reason that people who go on diets are irritable. It's really scary, whether it calls back some primal limbic fear of starvation that our ancestors experienced a lot, or some kind of loss or lack in our own early lives. It's very frightening to think that you're going to be hungry. And so lots of times these type B people, they are hungry a lot because they think that to keep their weight where they want it, they have to eat these little tiny portions. So in addition to super nutrition that we have to offer a way of eating where people can eat enough. I mean, I always talk about my giant salad bowls. You know, you can really eat enough so that you can chew and you can take time and you can have a conversation, and your body sends your brain the signal that you have indeed had enough to eat. So you're not only satisfying your 40 trillion cells with nutrition, but you're satisfying your brain with enoughness. Now, this person in the middle, this type B person, is going to probably be very, very upset with herself every time she eats what she thinks is bad. And so the people out there that are saying, don't judge foods, don't call one food bad and one food good, I think this is what they're getting at. And for that, they have a point. And yet we know that there are certain foods that maybe we shouldn't call them bad, maybe we should just call them non-foods. They're just not something that people are supposed to be eating. So, but this person is likely to think of them as bad and think of herself as bad. So some of the things that help this person, in addition to the whole food, plant-based approach, is the idea of sitting down to eat, valuing herself, good dishes, cloth napkins, things like that, and then taking care of whatever emotional emptiness is going on with therapy, meditation, yoga, whatever works, and sometimes it's all of the above. But the person that I am most interested in, because this is the group into which I fall, and it's also the group that is least understood, and this is the type C, the compulsive overeater, food addict. I think of it as a rubber band, and this is your willpower. So you got this rubber band and you're just like, nah, you know, playing with it and you're stretching it out. But one day it breaks. And then what are you going to do? And so people say, oh, it's all my fault. I'm so terrible. I have no willpower. It's not the person's fault. It's what happens when a rubber band gets stretched a lot. It's the idea that we can cross over a line, I believe, and have experienced into which we need more help than just the food. And I think that the reason that this is so important for us who are in the whole food plant-based world to understand is that we have all run into people who say, I tried that. It didn't work for me. I did that. I didn't lose any weight. I did that and I just didn't feel very good. I did that and I felt tired and I felt weak. And it's so frustrating because we can't say, no, you didn't. You know, they experienced what they experienced or what they perceived to have experienced. And yet for some of these people, certainly not all, but I think for some of them, it's that they just weren't able to do it. And that's, I believe, the key. We know we have a wonderful approach to nutrition. We know what it's done for us. We've seen what it's done for others. We know how full and satisfied and energized and healthy we feel. And when somebody says, well, I did that and I didn't feel that way, we can't very well say you're lying, because they're not. They had some other perception, some other experience. But sometimes it's because they just couldn't do it. They just couldn't maintain this because it's too difficult. So there's a story, this is actually in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I think it applies to food addicts very much too, of a man who was very wealthy. He was a New York City businessman back in the 1930s, and he had a very serious alcohol problem, but he had a lot of money. So he was able to get on the steamship first class and go visit Dr. Carl Jung in Austria. And he stayed there for several months, and Dr. Jung worked with him, and he went back full of confidence. He thought, I am fixed. It's all going to be great. Within 2 weeks, he was just drunk. But he's still rich. So he went back to Carl Jung and said, what's the problem? I thought you'd fix me. And Carl Jung said, people of your description almost never get better, but there have been cases throughout history where someone has a complete emotional and mental displacement and rearrangement, something akin to a spiritual experience. This is what I was trying to bring about in you, and obviously I failed. So the man went back to New York thinking that he was going to end his life in either institutionalization or early death, but AA had come on the scene and he found it and lived as happily ever after as people do in the real world. But I love to share that those words of Dr. Jung, a complete emotional and mental displacement and rearrangement, something akin to a spiritual experience. Now, I realize that spiritual experiences are outside our realm as whole food, plant-based eaters and plant-powered Metro New York, but I do think it's essential to understand that when somebody tells you that they didn't succeed with this, they can't make it, they can't get it, that they may need some other help from somewhere else. For me, that was a 12-step program. There may be other ways to get that. I mean, there are lots of ways to do everything on this earth, but it's not always just the food. About 5 years ago, maybe longer, the older you get, this is a heads up for people who are younger than me, who's practically everybody. The older you get, the more things you have to remember, and it all gets weird. You start to think, well, how, wasn't that just like a year ago? And then you find out, no, that was like 5 years ago. But anyway, it wasn't yesterday and it wasn't last week. A woman called me in tears, and she had gone to see a plant-based physician in another part of the country, not here. And he had told her at first, just do the diet. And she went back a second time and had not lost any weight. That was her goal. And he said, well, just do the diet. You do the diet, you're going to lose the weight. It's all going to be great. Well, when she went back the third time and she had actually gained weight, he said, just do the damn diet. And that's when she called me in tears, because there are some people who just cannot do the damn diet. And so it's very, very important that we understand that people are coming from different places, and we need to have the patience to walk with them through what is needed to make this work. So I'm going to give just a few little tips and suggestions that I find have been helpful to me as I have been on this journey, and I know that they work for some other people too. One of those is that pretty much as a rule, I eat 3 meals a day. Now, I realize this is individual, and I understand that people who have hypoglycemia, people in the late stages of pregnancy, there are all sorts of reasons for eating smaller meals more often. For me, as a compulsive overeater, it's been a godsend to eat 3 meals a day. And that's because compulsive eaters relate to food differently from other people. So other people get some food, and then that makes them not want to eat for a while. But with a compulsive eater, they can be involved in a project, not even thinking about food, and then somebody comes around with, the donut cart or whatever, they eat one, and then they're obsessed with food. It's like, where's the rest of the donuts? Where's something? Don't I have some almonds from Starbucks left in my drawer from the other day? I mean, it's just, it becomes like, feed me, feed me, feed me. So knowing that it can be a dangerous thing for a compulsive overeater to eat, even though we need to eat on a regular basis. If we eat 3 meals a day, it's this beautiful boundary. So I eat when it's time to eat. I live when it's time to live. I find that saying some kind of table grace or sitting quietly, breathing, having gratitude for the food, this all helps. It is impossible to pray over a binge. I tried it a lot. And that's just another way to punctuate these meals. So I have a friend out in the Midwest who's a Protestant lady who visited a Catholic Mass. And at the end of the Mass, the priest said, "The Mass is ended, I go in peace," which is customary. And she just really picked up on that this became her after meal prayer. The meal has ended, I go in peace. And I think this period, this punctuation at the end of a meal can be so incredibly important because sometimes people will say, I do fine all day. And then I have dinner and then I sit down and we'll start watching television. And when I wake up the next morning, there are just all these bags around me of stuff that I ate. So being able to have the 3 meals and punctuate the meals is very, very helpful. I've certainly found it so. It's also a way to be more like the rest of the people. Because if you go on vacation, you stay in a bed and breakfast. You get a job, the boss has to give you a lunch hour. You are interested in a guy or a woman and you want them to ask you out for dinner. It's the way the world is set up wherever you go on earth. So that's something that's helpful. It's not a religion. It's not like, for example, just now, I was busy working and didn't get lunch at the regular time. And I saw, oh my goodness, it's almost 1 o'clock. And so I ate half of an apple. I would have eaten all of the apple. I just didn't have time. So, you know, a piece of fruit, a green juice, something like that, no problem. But as a general rule, to really eat meals. And there used to be a saying, 3 meals a day and nothing in between, 1 day at a time. But I like 3 meals a day living in between, because one of the things that's really important for both the type B person, the emotional eater, and for the compulsive eater is that we learn how to live, and being able to sit with feelings, being able to just sit between 11 o'clock and 12:30 or whatever time you feel it's appropriate to have lunch is an opportunity for a lot of growth. Because what we're really talking about, the people that have issues with weight just because they have been eating fast food and processed foods, that's really different from somebody who's using food to deal with life. And we have to be aware of that. So in terms of sitting with feelings, the practice of meditation can be a wonderful thing for all aspects of life, certainly for this. And to be able to sit with feelings, regardless of what's going on, is so important, because then we can also learn how to sit with cravings. And this is a tough one, because people who get food cravings believe that they're fatal. They believe that if they don't give into the craving, something terrible is going to happen. I mean, I believed that for years. It's like, if I wanted a Snickers bar, I could eat 124 apples and bananas, but that was still going to be one gone Snickers bar, because that was my craving. That was what I had to have. But a craving has never killed anybody. And pardon the noise in the background. My husband is fixing food. I should have probably done this in a room with a closed door. My apologies. So to be able to just sit and be with feelings is a really important thing. So when I was writing my book, The Love Powered Diet, which is the one that talks about my history through all of this and plant-based lifestyle as part of it, I wrote a little fairy tale, and I'm going to share that with you guys. Once upon a time, there was a woman whose house was possessed by demons. And every night they would come and she would get so scared. And she would go into the village and ask the parish priest if he would come and do an exorcism. And he would go out there and he'd bring the crucifix and the garlic and the holy water. But the demons would come back and she'd go back into the village. She'd drag him out again. And finally, he was just getting sick of this. And he said, "Madam, your problem is so severe that no mere exorcism will do. I'm going to have to give you the holy stool." And he went over by his chair and he picked up this little wooden hassock and he said, "This is what you need. And when the demons come, I want you to take this little stool, put it in the middle of your living room and just sit." Well, she didn't want to do that at all, but it was her only option. So she took the stool and went home. And that night the demons came and there were more of them than she had ever seen. Well, all she could do was get the stupid stool. So she did. She put it in the middle of the living room and sat on it. And to her surprise, the demons started to leave. And after a while, they were all gone. Now, they did come back the next night, but they didn't stay as long. And then they skipped a couple of nights. And when they came again, there weren't so many of them. But she held on to that stool. And that poor priest missed his favorite footstool for the rest of his life. So the moral of the story is, when we can sit with those feelings without anything to eat, drink, or chew, and just be with them and experience what they feel like, then the demons, the cravings tend to dissipate. So I would like to just pause here for a while because I see lots of names and some faces, and I want to make sure that in the time that we have, I do cover your questions. So what's on your mind? And I know I've talked about a lot of things that don't have to do with the whole food plant-based diet. You can certainly ask what I think and do about that as well. So does anybody have a question?
Victoria, there were a few questions that came in through the chat that I want to bring up with you.
Okay.
One is actually related to the intuitive eating approach, which
Yes.
maybe you could explain a little bit to all of our listeners so we know everybody understands. But what's your opinion of that
Well, I
based on
think,
all
yeah,
of it?
I think it depends upon the person's background. So intuitive eating is you eat what you're drawn to. You listen to your body and you eat what your body says to eat. They've actually done studies with young children that if these young children have not been exposed to junk foods and lots of heavy sugar, oil, and salt, then they will really select a very balanced diet out of the foods that are offered to them. But if the children have been going to McDonald's and, you know, all the candies and stuff like that, then they lose that ability. And these are very young kids who lose it. So my own opinion is that a whole lot of us have lost it. And so certainly for a compulsive eater, you don't want to do intuitive eating. That's like saying to a heroin addict, "What do you feel like you need right now? Do you need a massage? You need a hot bath?" Like, well, those would be good, but you know, I really need to shoot up. And that's what happens with people who depend on food. That connection to the intuition, which really ought to be there and it ought to work, but first we lose it because of the food. And then if somebody goes on to get into the addictive side of this, then they can't hear the intuition because the addiction is louder. So if it works for you, then it's beautiful. And then it means that you either were brought up on really good food, or you've been away from the other food long enough that that is something that you can practice. I wouldn't suggest it to anybody that I was working with who was having these kinds of issues, because they've lost that ability, maybe only temporarily.
Great. And I guess to follow up on that, related to your points before as well, if someone is eating 3 meals a day but continues to have those compulsive feelings and makes those 3 meals long and fuller than needed, what do you recommend?
Well, I think that it's 3 moderate meals. So what I used to say to myself when I wasn't so whole food plant-based, when I started, like back in the 80s and even the 90s, there was not very much vegan processed food at all. So we were largely whole food plant-based just because there wasn't a lot else. You got rid of the animal products, you got rid of almost all of the junk foods, the desserts and everything, because they all had lard or whey or egg albumin, or there was something in there that wasn't vegan. So being just vegan at that time was really good enough. Now, nobody at that time was talking about oil-free. It hadn't even come up. So Dr. Ornish's findings were published in 1990, and he was talking about 10% of calories from fat for people with active heart disease, 15 to 20% of calories from fat for other people. And whether you got some of that from extracted oil or not, it hadn't come up. The first person that talked about not eating oil that I'm aware of was Dr. John McDougall, who came on the scene around 1985. So what I was doing with the 3 moderate meals was I would say, okay, a dinner plate, this is your dinner. And you can have a lot, you can have a lot of rice, you can have a lot of beans, you can have a lot of vegetables, but one plate. And so moderate. So if you look at my lunch salad, it looks gargantuan. And like Dr. Goldhammer is fond of saying, if somebody sees you eating a salad and they don't say, you're not going to eat all that, are you? Then your salad isn't big enough. But it's moderate for the way I eat today. So for somebody that is still practicing food addiction within the boundaries of 3 meals a day, you have to understand that we addicts are very good at conniving people. We're also the world's best liars. So somebody will tell you one thing and it doesn't necessarily mean what's going on, or will try to rig the system, well, I'm only eating 3 meals a day. Yeah, but they go on for 2.5 hours and they're full of all kinds of stuff. So I think we just have to be really honest with ourselves. And I think some of that is there's this fear of I'm going to be hungry. And it's really interesting where those fears come from. They did some really interesting research on obese people in Scandinavia whose mothers were pregnant with them during the food shortages of World War II. And they found that those people who had always had enough to eat in their own lives, but who were basically starved in the womb, tend to have a higher incidence of obesity than other people, including people who hadn't had enough to eat when they were young. So the why for all of this can be very mysterious. And I prefer, not to die asking why. I would rather just go with the how and make it work. So I don't know if that answered the question. Anybody who wants to write to me or talk to me later, I'd be happy to do that, because I don't want to leave people saying, well, she didn't answer what I asked.
Thanks, Victoria.
Yeah.
There was another mention in the chat of Susan Pierce Thompson's work on bright lines. And remind me, flour, sugar, what are the other two? If whoever, what was it? Nivi, do you want to tell us what the bright lines are?
3 meals a day and quantities.
Great. Let me get you. Yeah, there you go,
Yeah,
Nikki.
okay, okay. I wasn't sure if I could, or if you wanted me to just message. Yeah, 3 meals a day, like somebody just mentioned, and quantities, and also not looking at food porn. Like one of the big things that she said is stop looking at triggers. When you keep looking at, your feed in social media that serves you with, oh, look at what somebody made, vegan pasta, all of those things. So she basically talks about going social media blank, and not presenting in your life with all those neurological triggers, and cutting that loop that might be happening. I think there's flour, sugar, salt, oil. Yeah, those kind of things.
Yeah, Victoria, what do you have to say about?
Well, early on, of course, when I started this, we didn't have the internet, but for the first year, I just cooked from memory. I was afraid, I was literally afraid to open up a cookbook because I knew that that could be triggering. But one of the cool things about growing into a bigger life is that it doesn't mean that you cut yourself off from everything forever. And so I remember, allowing myself one vegan cookbook and coming to see that I could go anywhere that anybody could go. I could be anywhere that anybody could be. And if I stayed in what the 12-step programs call fit spiritual condition, I could be there with as much ease as anybody else. I think early on, it's sort of like early recovery from a physical illness. It's like, I was caring for a very young baby. You start things slowly, but you can get to a point where I remember, this was probably 20 years ago, 25 even, but I'd been free from this for long enough that I was feeding my cats. And, cat food tends to be unappealing even to meat eaters. But I remember just looking at this cat food, and I remember thinking, that's how the food looks that I don't eat anymore. That's how animal foods look to me. That's how super duper junk food looks to me. It's kind of like, for the cat or for anybody else who wants it, it's fine. It's just not my food. And that happens as we do this over and over, a day at a time. I think it's also really important to have camaraderie, to have people in your life who get this and who eat like you, especially if there are a lot of people in someone's life who don't eat this way. And for most people, they discover this. It's very unusual for, a couple or a whole family or a whole office to discover this at the same time and be there to support each other. So that's really our job, because all of these things, and I'm talking more about the B and the C person, that make somebody feel a little bit out of place, a little bit off, a little bit not accepted, that's going to make it worse. That's going to make them more want to turn to the food. And so if eating in a way that people say, ooh, that's weird, what's that? Oh my God, everything you eat is green, then that could backfire. And so people really do need a lot of support.
Absolutely. Are there others who have questions? You can unmute and ask, Victoria.
I see all these familiar names. I wish there were more faces. Hi.
There we go. And did you have a question?
I have a question. It's a little off topic. Do you have a preferred cat food brand?
My last cat went to kitty heaven, I think 11 years ago. So I have not been in the cat food business. I mean, I would not make my cat vegan.
No.
When the lab grown meat happens, that will be wonderful for cats as well as for a lot of other animals. But yeah, I would just get some kind of really high quality cat food, and I'd read up on their practices, and if they do all kinds of horrible animal laboratory research on their cat food, I wouldn't buy that one. It's yeah, it's one of those wonderful, like, it took a long time for my dog to be vegan. He's finally made it, bless his heart. But before, I felt like, oh, if it weren't for my dog, I'd be this perfect vegan. And it's like, you know what? Now my dog eats vegan and I'm still not a perfect person. So I can't count on my dog to do that for me. What kind of cat do you have?
I've got two long-haired Persians, but I've been on a probably year-long at this point, trying to figure out the, ethically sourced cat food that they really don't like at all, and making compromises with what tastes good to them so they'll actually eat it, and then may not be as ethically or pure as I would want. But I don't want to swerve the conversation. I know there's other people, and I just loved what you said, just to say about 3 meals a day, because I know with the intermittent fasting, which you also mentioned, people are trying that, and then there's a lot of I know with some of the mentees
I lost you, Wendy.
Yeah, I think she got bumped out of the call, unfortunately. Hopefully she'll be back.
Okay. Well, I think what she was going to say is about people that do the intermittent fasting and go nuts with it. Like I was talking to someone and I was saying, we pretty much try to finish dinner, by like 7, and I don't eat in the morning other than my lemon water or celery juice until about 9. And she's like, well, that's only 14 hours or something like. But the truth is, you also have to know yourself. I mean, if I go 18 hours without food, guess what I'm going to be thinking about, to the exclusion of everything else that needs to be done in my life? Food. And so I think with all of this kind of stuff, we do have to know ourselves and honor ourselves. But one of the other things that's so wonderful about this way of eating, if somebody has a problem with food, is that all of a sudden it becomes part of something bigger and more important. And as we look at the environmental situation, as we realize what's been done to animals for all these years and that people are finally waking up to that, as we just look at the COVID-19 situation and the zoonotic diseases, this is big. This is not just, ooh, I went on this diet and lost some weight. No, this is major. And for somebody to get it, that they are part of this incredible movement to transform this planet, it's a lot easier to keep up the next day with eating food that maybe you're not yet completely used to, if you have this firm idea, I am part of this grand and glorious effort to make this world better and maybe help it last and help the species survive. I mean, it's so big. So if people can get that, that's something that no other diet can offer. People can lose weight on all kinds of diets. They can get better medical results, blood results. I'm sure they can even reverse certain diseases, because there's a lot of awful food that people take in. And so just taking out some of them can make big differences for people. But there is no other way of eating that can make somebody part of this really sacred effort to save this planet. And I think to not back down on that is really important. And I think sometimes we talked about this the other night, to have allies. It's like no longer in my life do I eat beyond cheeseburgers. I mean, I never ate beyond cheeseburgers because they didn't have them, but the equivalent. But that doesn't mean that I am not going to line up in solidarity with somebody who does, to help save this planet. So we're onto something here. And I think it can help people with food issues, weight issues, health issues. We already know that. But there's more to it. And I think we have to let people know how big this is and how cool this is. And
I definitely resonate with that, Victoria. Yes.
It was so powerful, Victoria. Thank you. I'm trying to start another pod with a group of leaders in have gone through a spiritual and emotional transformation, and you just sealed it for me. Exactly.
Oh, I'm so, yeah,
Thank you.
you must do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and you mentioned, I just want to recommend a book. It has nothing to do with weight. But when you talked about people who have gone through trauma and that kind of thing, there's a beautiful book called Yoga for the Wounded Heart by Tatiana Ferrero Puerta. But just remember, Yoga for the Wounded Heart. It's a beautiful, beautiful book for people who have dealt with trauma. And I'll just recommend a couple of other books. In fact, if there's an email list, Liana, of people who were here, I can send them my book list, because I believe that most of what is written specifically about weight loss is really off, because it doesn't take the whole person into account. It's written by somebody who has possibly never eaten in response to emotion, somebody who doesn't even understand, like, how can you be addicted to food? Everybody eats, you don't get addicted to food. Yes, some of us get addicted to food. So there are a few books that I recommend. I talked about the Love Powered Diet, which I wrote. I also wrote one called Fit From Within, which is 101 little tiny snippets for making peace with food. And thinking, like, I really do remember the names of some of the ones that I didn't write. But I can send you all those. Oh, here's one: Drop the Fat Act and Live Lean by Ryan Andrews. He is I've teased him that he's the only person that I know who's written a book on this subject, who has never experienced compulsive eating, who really gets it. And it comes from the book publishing company. It is whole food, plant-based. So that's another good one. But there are others, and I can send them to you if you're interested. I'll also send a questionnaire, which actually comes from OA, that people can ask themselves to see if maybe they do have more of an issue with food than just the fact that the food at McDonald's isn't going to make people healthy and happy.
Thanks, Victoria. There are a few great questions that came in through the chat as well. And if you're okay going past two, what I'll do is I'll read them to you, and then we can take whatever you'd like. So one is actually very practical, feeling satiated with eating more vegetables. What do we do, especially if we're trying to stay away from higher starch foods, if people want to try to lose the weight? And for you, being somebody who eats a high raw diet with fewer legumes and grains in it, what do you actually do on a very practical day-to-day basis to feel satiated with your meals?
Yeah. Well, first, I eat a lot. You know, my salads are huge. I have some wonderful new hot cereal, because I'm not crazy about oatmeal. I know we're all supposed to sing the praises of oatmeal. It's sort of like, you know, it's gruel. I'll eat it. I put enough berries and flax and walnuts on it. But basically, I'm not thrilled with it. And I like to be thrilled. You know, I like to be happy with what I eat. So I found this new wonderful, you know, whole kind of cereal stuff, hot cereal in the little envelopes. But I'm going to have 2 of them and put all that other stuff on top, because I think we got into this idea when we were trying to eat moderately on the standard American diet that we're supposed to eat these little bitty tiny portions. It's no wonder people want to overeat, or people go to the refrigerator 2 hours after dinner and you know, raid it, because they're just hungry. So the first thing is eat enough. The second thing, in my opinion, and this is just me, but I don't think it's a good idea to go crazy with trying to make it light, because you believe that that is going to bring about additional weight loss. Over time, if you do this over time, if you do this a day at a time for 2 years, and you're still not seeing your weight where you like it, and you've been all checked out physically to know that there's not something else that could be causing that, then you might very, very slowly and judiciously see if cutting back a little bit on something, like you mentioned, starches, Wendy, or nuts and seeds or something. But the fact is, it may be that our bodies know what they want to weigh more than we do. And I think that the deprivation can be really dangerous and kind of just unpleasant. So that I'm also not a complete low fat eater. And I learned this back when I was, I was not consistently abstinent from compulsive overeating. I was not vegan, but I was working at a restaurant where you could get lunch for free. And they made these fabulous, great, big, fluffy cheese omelets with steak fries. And whenever I had that for lunch, I didn't even want any dinner. And I remember thinking, it's this magical meal. It takes all my hunger away. Well, what it was just this incredible, dangerous, damaging load of fat, but very, very satiating. So for me, if we're talking like oatmeal in the morning, oatmeal without the flax and the walnuts and the hemp and the chia keeps me satisfied for an hour and a half. Put that other stuff in there, and then I'm fine until lunch. So I think, embracing some of the food with a little bit more oomph to it. And I do like raw food, Liana, but I eat cooked food. I eat solid food. I just don't want to get the reputation out there that I don't do that, because then whenever we're opened up again and we're all going out and I eat something solid, somebody's going to say, no, you were supposed to eat grass. No, I'm not.
Gotcha. Thank you. And we will follow up with all of you here with further resources. So thanks. I'm watching the chat box. I think maybe we'll leave it with one more question, Victoria. Do you have any advice for us how to deal with pandemic-related anxiety and, with the food and the health issues tied into that?
Yeah. Well, I am very grateful that the way I live my life keeps, thank goodness, the idea that I could deal with anxiety with food at bay. So if that's what the question is about, then I would really recommend that you read those books I talked about and some of the others that are going to be on the list. And that regardless of what your worldview is, that you develop some sort of spiritual practice that fits your worldview. So whether that's yoga, meditation, whatever it is that fits, we have to have something to grab onto now. And I'm prone to anxiety, just genetically and physiologically, where somebody else might be prone to anger. I'm prone to being scared to death. And so I have to fight that every day. And certainly every day through coronavirus. In fact, I said to my daughter, it's like, I'm fine, but everything on my to-do list is horrifying. And it is, because there's just so much uncertainty. Anything that I commit to, like in a business sense, I don't know if I can really commit because nobody knows what's coming. And even just, walking the dog, going out into the hallway and walking down it to do the laundry, it's like, it's really scary. And so some of the ways that I know to deal with that, one is to really eat well and be satisfied, because I don't want to have to deal with all that fear when I'm also hungry. That just compounds it. There's a little acronym that they throw around in the 12 steps, which is it's HALT, H-A-L-T, never get too hungry, too angry, too lonely, or too tired. And that's tough right now. Like with lonely, there are people who maybe aren't used to living alone, and there are other people in their family are off somewhere else and they're just all alone. And I think we all feel a little bit lonely because we're not around three-dimensional people, friends. And so this is all stuff to deal with, but hungry we can handle. We don't have to be hungry. We don't have to be tired. And sometimes I think it's important to just give yourself what you love. So I have a list, and I have it on the inside of my closet door. That is the stuff that fills me up. What makes me feel like, you know what, you've done a lot in your life and you can do anything. Well, I don't remember that stuff when I'm scared and anxious. I don't even know what it is. That's why I have it on the inside of my closet door. So some of the things that I do is listen to super uplifting music. Most of them come from Broadway musicals. And so, they're telling me that I can climb every mountain and, that I can dream the impossible dream. And I believe it. I mean, that wonderful Susan Boyle, Britain's Got Talent audition. It's been around for 11 years, but I watch it whenever I feel like, oh my gosh, I can't handle this, because it fills me up. Wonderful movies. I was talking this morning, I've been doing this Facebook Live every morning at 11:30, and I'll do that through April. I call it Enchanted April. And I was talking about this movie from my childhood, Auntie Mame, 1958 Rosalind Russell movie, that really shaped my character as a kid and continues to. And every time I watch it, I recognize myself. It's like, this is where I live. This is my kind of role model that I want to become and be like. And so all that stuff, a lot of it seems really, sappy and kind of silly, like, oh yeah, but whatever works. For a lot of people, exercise, getting out in the park. I mean, I loved getting out in the park until then I started feeling unsafe in the park. And so when I lost the park, I had to put in more of that music and more of those movies, and other stuff. And also, just the last thing I'll say is, if something helps you with your anxiety that other people don't think is sophisticated, like trash TV, you know what? Especially now, it's real good. Whatever you need.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Always wisdom coming out of your pores. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining us. We have many more wonderful web sessions coming up. Tonight, we have our ongoing series for Spanish speakers on Thursdays at 7 p.m. You can join with Mare, who's on our call today. And they'll be talking about carbohydrates and why we shouldn't be afraid of them. And on Saturday night, we also have a Forks Over Knives watch party. You can watch the movie with us through Netflix, and then we'll hop onto Zoom afterwards and have a great conversation with Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, whose story of diabetes reversal is truly inspiring. And there's many more posted on our site. I'm going to put the URL in the chat here. But thank you all for joining, and have a wonderful day. And I'm really looking forward to taking these little nuggets that Victoria has given us and making them my own. And I hope that each of you has a takeaway as well. Be in touch if you need anything from us at Plant Powered Metro New York. And I wish you a beautiful day.